to the developing story of the prison break at the Kamiti Maximum Prison.
Well, 3 terror convicts who were rearrested after escaping from Kamiti Maximum Prison now claim that they were aided by prison officials to escape from the well-guarded facility.
When President Uhuru Kenyatta stood at the Mashujaa Day podium in October 2021 and triumphantly announced the lifting of Kenya's dusk-to-dawn COVID-19 curfew.
And by the authority vested in me as President, I hereby order and direct that the nationwide dusk-to-dawn curfew that has been in effect from the 27th of March 2020 be and is hereby vacated with immediate effect. Asante sana, God bless you, and God bless you. Asante sana.
Most people had freedom, a return to nightlife, jobs, weddings, normal life, but deep inside the stone walls of Kamiti Maximum Security Prison, that same announcement meant something entirely different. Because for a small group of men hidden behind 10-foot-high walls, razor wire, and the illusion of order, it wasn't the end of the curfew. It was the beginning of their plan. Unbeknownst to the nation, Uhuru's words completed a blueprint that had been in the works for months, a plan drafted in secret, whispered across steel bars, and etched into the minds of 4 men who had already stared death in the face. This wasn't just desperation, this was design, and the masterminds, they were tucked away in cell number 6, located in Condemn Block A, the part of Kamiti reserved for the worst of the worst. The court trio, Musharraf Abdallah, Juma Odhiambo, and Mohammed Abikar, convicted terrorists who weren't just inmates. They were men who had already made it onto Kenya's most wanted list before they ever wore a prison uniform. Musharraf Abdallah and Yassin Juma had been arrested back in 2012, charged under multiple acts: the Explosives Act, Fireman's Act, Organized Crime Act, Immigration Act, and even the Penal Code. According to prosecutors, they were caught with explosives and had plotted an attack targeting none other than Kenya's parliament buildings. That's not petty crime, that's an act of war. The courts didn't take it lightly. On August 1st, 2017, the 2 were convicted and slapped with 22-year sentences. But they wouldn't be alone for long. In 2019, they were joined by another high-profile figure, Mohammed Ali Abikar, one of the men connected to one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in Kenyan history, the Garissa University College massacre, where 148 innocent students lost their lives in a brutal, senseless Al-Shabaab assault. Abikar, along with 2 others, Rashid Beresero and Hassan Eddin Hassan, were found guilty of being in direct contact with the killers, accused of aiding the planning and execution. Judge Francis Andayi didn't mince words. The court believed the prosecution had proven beyond reasonable doubt that the men knew about the attack in advance and were not just sympathizers, but co-conspirators. Abikar was sentenced to 41 years in prison, but the cast wasn't complete yet. In 2020, another man joined the group, Joseph Juma Odhiambo, a 15-year sentence convict from Mumias who was arrested in Mandera attempting to illegally cross into Somalia, likely en route to join Al-Shabaab. The charges: crossing an undesignated border point and evading immigration. On paper, it may sound small, but in context, it was a massive red flag. Authorities feared that Juma was attempting to join foreign terror networks, and the law came down hard. But here's where things get twisted. Despite the heavy sentences, despite the evidence, despite everything the court had proven beyond reasonable doubt, none of the 4 believed they were guilty. Each one had filed appeals, hoping for reduced sentences or even acquittals. But as the days turned into months and the months turned into years, they came to a shared conclusion. Justice in Kenya was a game of time, and time was not on their side. With their appeals dragging through the clogged arteries of Kenya's judicial system, their frustration grew, not just at the convictions, but at the system itself. The feeling that they had been denied fair hearings and the law was more about power than truth, and that justice delayed is justice denied. And when hope fades in prison, something darker takes its place. That's when the escape plan began to take shape. For men, one shared belief: the only way out was through the walls, and what they pulled off would become one of the most embarrassing security failures in Kenyan prison history. Before we dive down that rabbit hole, welcome to Shadows of Justice, where we tell crime stories from Kenya and beyond. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay hydrated. I'm Kahindi, and this is where things get insane. But if this escape was going to be more than just a fantasy whispered in the dark, the four men needed a critical piece of the puzzle, a human weak spot inside the system. They needed someone on the inside, a prison warden. And eventually, they found one, Warden X. We don't know his real name, not yet, but what we do know is that he was in charge of prisoners who handled routine maintenance jobs inside Kamiti: painting walls, fixing broken doors, replacing light bulbs, welding iron bars. In other words, he had access to tools. He controlled who could carry them, and more dangerously, who could smuggle them. Now, combine that kind of access with money, and things get murky. First, because unlike most prisoners, Abikar still had influence outside Kamiti walls. Connections, hidden cash flows, anonymous well wishes, and that money, it became leverage. A tool just as powerful as the steel cutters and the pliers the warden oversaw. So with bribes flowing and trust building, Warden X became more than just a compromised officer. He became the bridge between the prisoners and the outside world. He was their eyes and ears, their tool master, their banker. He'd inform them about security arrangements, camera blind spots, and even the shifts of fellow officers, so the four could time their movements precisely, making sure any suspicious activity only happened during friendly shifts. But now that they had a man on the inside, they needed a reason to move. And this is where the genius starts to show. Instead of crawling through tunnels or prying open cell bars like in some prison movie cliché, the four convicts wrote an official letter to the prison's welfare office, a formal complaint. They claimed their cell was too cold, freezing, in fact. And in the spirit of prison reforms, the administration listened. They were granted extra blankets. But what the officials didn't know was that those blankets were never meant for warmth. In reality, the prisoners were collecting them to build a rope and a makeshift ladder, tools they would eventually use to scale a 10-foot wall, the same wall that separated them from a country that had long forgotten them. It was bold, it was strategic, and it was happening in plain sight. The administration thought they were providing comfort. Instead, they had just handed the prisoners a way out. And soon, those blankets would carry more than warmth. They'd carry a national scandal. Now that they had their blankets, and now that they had their warden, the tools started arriving. Piece by piece, quietly, each item delivered not in chaos, but with precision. Warden X, now fully compromised, snuck tools into cell number 6 during his shift. Tools borrowed, stolen, or quietly misplaced from the prison's maintenance stores. He brought them a chisel, scissors, razor blades, a bar of soap, reams of paper, broomsticks, and even metal hooks. To a layman, it looked like junk. To a desperate man, it was an escape kit. And those weren't just for show. Each tool had a specific role in the plan. The chisel, for example, was the most vital, used to chip away at the concrete wall behind their bunk. They worked in the dead of night, slow and silent, hiding the growing hole with carefully painted sheet of paper, the exact same off-white tint as their prison wall, made using rims smuggled in and glued up using melted soap. Yes, soap. Even that had a purpose. Meanwhile, the broomsticks were repurposed as makeshift measuring rods, helping them calculate the height of the outer perimeter wall. That was critical because the blankets, those weren't for warmth anymore. They were being cut, tied, reinforced into a rope. A do-it-yourself climbing ladder designed to clear 10 feet of concrete and barbed wire. Each knot, each twist made under the watchful eye of the one man who could protect them, Warden X. This became their routine. By day, they chipped wall. By night, they braided rope, all while praying, hoping that the cameras didn't catch a flicker, that no officer on other shift noticed the faint scrap of chisel against cement, and yet none of it mattered if the timing wasn't right. Because even if the hole was ready, even if the rope was perfect, there were two massive problems: confidence and the nationwide COVID curfew. The cooling trees being caught outside during curfew hours. Every police patrol, every checkpoint, every late night border rider was potential death. So they waited. And then, Mashujaa Day 2021, President Uhuru Kenyatta lifted the curfew. The streets were free, and so were they. But still, doubt lingered until the day they saw what the state does to men like them, even after they've survived their sentence. Just a week later, a man named Egliva Bwire walked out of Kamiti Prison. He had served 10 years of a life sentence back in 2011. He'd been arrested for carrying a grenade into Nyayo Stadium on Mashujaa Day, fully confessing to being part of Al-Shabaab. Now, he was free, technically, but on paper, because Egliva disappeared the very same day he was released, gone, vanished, picked up by HEPU, the anti-terror police unit, in what insiders believe was a silent abduction, a message to every other inmate in Block A. And that message was clear: you can serve your time, but you will never truly be free. To the men in cell number 6, things changed everything, because now the fear of getting caught was smaller than the fear of doing nothing. The final jot of confidence they needed didn't come from faith or strength or hope. It came from Egliva's disappearance. That's when the plan transformed from a dream into destiny. Once the tools were prepped, the hole was hidden, and the ladder was braided. All that was left was timing. The escape had to be executed like a military operation. Every variable accounted for, every second planned. So after days of quietly studying the security routines at Kamiti and with inside tips from Warden X, the crew finally picked November 15, 2021 as the day they would vanish. Why that day? Simple. The wardens on duty were known to be sloppy, less attentive than their colleagues. More importantly, some of the prison CCTV cameras weren't working, and those that were blind spots the team already knew too well. And to top it all off, Warden X had informed them that a few officers had passed through the canteen earlier in the evening and donned a few drinks, just enough to dull their instincts. That night, the walls of Kamiti let their guard down, and the terrorists took their shot. Just after midnight, the inmates pulled back the sheet of paper that had concealed their wall cavity for weeks. One by one, they squeezed through the hole, emerging on the other side of the main prison wall. But they weren't out yet. Next, they walked, not ran, towards the staff quarters, using the dimly lit space to stay hidden. And then, like ghosts in the night, they scaled the final perimeter wall. using the makeshift blanket ladder, and disappeared into freedom. Outside the prison, a Toyota Probox sat idling. No license plate noted, no alarms raised. It was waiting, just like they planned. The car zipped them straight to Machakos, where they were scheduled to switch vehicles and begin the next leg of their journey toward the Somali border. The plan was airtight, but then everything collapsed. Because when they arrived in Machakos around 3:30 a.m., their second getaway car was nowhere to be found. No call, no driver, no plan B. So now, 3 convicted terrorists, armed with nothing but blankets and adrenaline, had to improvise. And what did they choose? They boarded a public matatu. Yes, 3 high-profile fugitives, fresh out of Kenya's most secure prison, sitting shoulder to shoulder with ordinary citizens on a matatu, heading to Kitui. It was bold, it was absurd, it didn't last long. Just a few kilometers outside Kitui, a civilian spotted them, walking on foot after disembarking, dirty, paranoid, and clearly out of place. The man alerted local authorities, and just like that, the escape ended. They were captured, dragged back to Kamiti under heavy guard, rebooked, and charged with prison escape. But even in court, the madness wasn't over, because during their trial, the 3 escapees made a very specific claim. They told the judge that Warden X, the man who had smuggled them tools, helped plan the escape and essentially acted as the mission's engineer. Wasn't even on the list of wardens charged. Not only that, the tools he smuggled in were completely missing from the evidence list. No chisels, no blades, no hooks, no soap, nothing. As if the entire operation had happened by magic, or maybe someone in the system wanted this to quietly disappear. A cover-up, an inside job protected from above. Whatever it was, Kenya had just witnessed a national embarrassment, and the cracks in the prison system were now fully exposed. The fallout came fast, but only after the public demanded blood. After weeks of outrage, online fury, and national embarrassment, President Uhuru Kenyatta was finally forced to act. He fired Wycliffe Ogalo, the Commissioner General of Prisons, in what many saw as a desperate PR move, a way to say we are fixing it without actually addressing the rot. But the heat didn't stop there. The top warden at Kamiti, along with 11 other prison officers, were rounded up and arrested, accused of aiding and abetting one of the most daring escapes in Kenya's recent history. They were hauled into Minimani Court, which usually handles high-stakes terrorism cases, but then a twist. Their lawyers stepped forward and challenged their narrative, arguing that these weren't terrorism suspects, but rather prison escape enablers, a criminal matter, not a security threat, a strategic move, because terrorism charges in Kenya carry far heavier consequences than standard criminal charges, and in a country where legal language can decide fate more than facts, this technicality mattered. In the end, they worked, released on a cash bill of just 300,000 Kenya shillings each. No maximum sentences, no public tribunal, just a quiet shuffle back into the system. And so once again, justice looked like a performance, not a resolution. Heads rolled, yes, but the same hands pulling the strings stayed hidden. The tools used in the escape never recovered. The main inside man, Warden X, still not charged, and the biggest question still lingers like a bad taste. How does a maximum security prison become a walk-in, walk-out facility for convicted terrorists unless someone at the top made sure it was? The Kamiti escape didn't just expose a gap in Kenya's prison system, it exposed a system that only moves when it's caught. And the scary part, if the second getaway car had arrived, they might have actually made it to Somalia. So what does that say about our national security? And who else might be planning something right now behind the walls? Nairobi Insight.